Hey everybody, it is Tammy Van Hollander, and I am here with my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Joelle McGovern. And Joelle knows that she is my go-to whenever I am struggling with OCD and just so many things. You are my person to go to. And when I kind of thought about all my resources pulling together today due to the pandemic, I'm like, "Oh, I have so many questions for Joelle. And I just thought you would be an awesome person to chat with. So thanks, Joelle, for coming on today.
Thank you for having me on, and thank you for doing this in general. I mean, this has been really helpful. I've been loving watching all the videos and hearing everybody and the different perspectives on the different topics. It's been really nice of you to offer your time and interview, and it's been really helpful, I think, for everybody. Thank you.
Sure. So Joelle, wherever you want to start, because I think there's so much insight that you can give to so many clinicians as well as parents in terms of how this pandemic is affecting all kids, but specifically with the kids that you're seeing with OCD.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it really depends on the kid. There are a good deal of kids that are actually feeling really good because all of their triggers are in the world. And so they're not in the world right now. So a lot of them are not even being triggered OCD wise. And because of the CDC recommendations about the cleaning, cleaning the groceries, using the hand sanitizer, washing your hands constantly, that is something that they already do. So now that everybody else is doing it, it's a little reassuring to them in that way. And so in some ways, some of the kids actually look like they have less symptoms, but it's only because they're doing a lot of the things they would be doing anyway, and so is everybody else, and that they're not out in the world with the triggers. But then there are the other kids that have, still have the symptoms in the house, or they have symptoms that are not related to contamination. So sometimes there's a lot of different OCD symptoms. It doesn't always have to be the contamination piece. There's, harm coming to you, harm coming to others. For the older kids, a lot of times there can be a sexual piece to it, worries about homosexuality or worries about like that they did something wrong to someone sexually, even though that they didn't. It's just sort of a thought and a worry thought that didn't actually happen. There's a lot of magical thinking pieces, and there is also things around just needing to, it almost looks like a tick sometimes, needing to count or needing to touch something. It depends, and things being not just right. So a lot of those are still going on for the kids, and some of them are connected to the virus, but some of them not. It really depends. So that's sort of how it seems to be impacting everybody in general. Is it really is a big range depending on what's going on with the kids and what their OCD triggers are.
I love when we spoke yesterday and we were chatting and how you said that follow the CDC, not the OCD. And I thought that was just such an important way of looking at it. So for those kids who do fear contamination, one thing that you also said in the conversation, which I thought was really interesting, is that it gives us more insight to some of these kids of what they go through on a day-to-day, what we're going through now. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah. There's a number of things. One is that the kids who have contamination fears already, anything can kind of enter in as a new obsessive thought. And even if you don't have contamination fears, sometimes when something new pops up in your environment, you can start having contamination fears. And so those kids who are worried about contamination in general, and maybe it's also hooked onto the virus, to COVID-19, that's important to know. And it's important, first off, to give them a little bit of knowledge about how do you get it and how can you stay safe and what are people doing to stay safe. It's tricky with OCD because a lot of kids have reassurance seeking rituals. So they're seeking a lot of reassurance about, are they doing things right? Is this safe? Is that safe? Are you doing this thing safe? And it's a lot of reassurance. But in the beginning, when they don't know anything, and frankly, we're still learning about it, giving them that knowledge is really important, that basic knowledge, so that they know what the CDC guidelines are. and then helping them recognize when they're going above and beyond those guidelines. So follow the CDC and not the OCD. I just want to credit Marty Franklin, Dr. Marty Franklin with that he runs Rogers, the partial hospitalization in Bala Cynwyd. And he was my supervisor at University of Pennsylvania. And so that is his phrase that he developed. So I do want to make sure he gets that credit. And the idea is that if the CDC recommends that you wash your hands, anytime you come in from outside, before you eat, all the normal times you would wash your hands, plus if you touched anything that you thought might be contaminated in some way with the virus, you would wash your hands, but you don't need to wash them more than that. So if kids haven't touched anything and they're washing their hands 25 times, but they haven't touched anything and they're washing just in case they did, that's more likely to be OCD, an OCD compulsion, and that's not actually keeping them safe because they don't really need to do that. And so helping kids and parents recognize when the hand washing or the not touching or the checking on other people or the reassurance seeking, when that is excessive, when it's above and beyond what they need to do, then that's OCD sort of hijacking it and using it in that way and creating this sense of I need to do these compulsions to stay safe based on a false alarm versus the CDC recommendations, which are based on a real alarm that we're all responding to.
That's very helpful.
So that's the one piece. And then the other piece that you talked about is the, now I'm forgetting, remind me. How you can feel. So it helps, I think, us all get a sense of how we can be compassionate around kids who are diagnosed with OCD and are struggling with some of these things on a day-to-day basis that we're doing as part of our normal right now, but they have to do all the time in their mind to stay safe. So all the worries that we have about, is this safe? Is that safe? What did my kids just touch? What did my spouse just touch? And all of the times we're feeling like, we need to, wash the groceries, do it, follow everything the CDC says, how tiring it is to do all of those things. I think it's a really great opportunity for people to see how tiring it can be to have OCD and to feel like you need to sort of excessively wash or avoid to stay safe. The difference is, and I think it's an important difference, is what we're doing is not OCD. So the difference is that when it is OCD, it's based on a false alarm, and other people are not doing it. And that creates a different kind of tension and stress in the household and everywhere else. So we don't feel that right now. We can feel how exhausting it is to have to sort of overdo things that we didn't used to have to overdo, but we don't necessarily have a sense of, I'm in this alone and no one else is doing it, and it's creating conflict in the family. And now my brother's mad at me because I've asked him 17 times if he's touched that thing. And that's one thing that we can't really, I think, pull from this compassion-wise, but at least we can pull this is exhausting. And it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to hold and to remember. And if you forget, you immediately have that anxiety. Yesterday we bought hoagies and I put the hoagie into the refrigerator and I didn't think about it. I didn't think about washing my hands afterwards. And then I sat down and ate dinner, and immediately I started thinking, oh no, I touched that wrap. And then immediately you start noticing things like, am I feeling this? Am I feeling that? And that can give you a really good sense of what it is like for the kids, because with OCD, it's really kind of a doubting disease, right? So it's like, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? Did I do this? Did I do that? Did I touch this? And so it gives you a sense of what that feels like as well.
Right. So Joelle, you also were showing me something pretty cool that you're doing regarding exposures online. So could you show us and tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of really good benefits to working online with kids in their house. One, it gets them in their natural environment, and there are triggers in their natural environment that I recreate in my office, but it's very different when it happens in your home than it's in your office. It's very different when it's a recreation versus it's actually happening. So in some ways, helping the families work through these points where kids feel like they need to do a compulsion in real time in their home is really, really beneficial. And so that's really helpful. The other thing that's really helpful with them being in their home is that they can, a lot of times they'll walk us through the OCD routines. Like, this is what I do at night before I go to bed. I have to do X, Y, and Z before I get into my bed. And because they're doing it in their bedrooms, or wherever it is that it's happening, sometimes we're learning part of the OCD ritual that we didn't see before. Because before it was all by verbal report, right? And they're away from the space and they're just saying, like, these are my rituals. But when they're at home and they're walking me through the different rituals they do, sometimes one will come up and I'll say, well, wait a minute, I didn't know that was happening. And they're like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you about that one. So that's a positive. The other positive is that you can do a lot of virtual work where you can create a background depending on what platform you're using. So with Zoom, you can use a virtual background. So I'll show you now one of the, an idea. So this is really gross, but this is now me in a dirty bathroom, right? And my client can also upload a dirty bathroom or whatever it is. It could be a dog if they're, it doesn't matter. It could be something else. It doesn't have to be contamination related, right? It could be something else. A lot of times with dogs, they're worried about contamination too, right? So sometimes kids will say, well, what if my dog carries it? So we might actually have the dog come in, right, and pet the dog, or we may upload the picture. And then here we can do some exposure-based work where we're in the dirty bathroom. It may elicit feelings of anxiety for the child. You might even have the child like touch, pretend to touch something, and then, keep rub it on their hands or whatever it is. And that increases, for the people who don't know exposure and response prevention, what that does is you're basically playing with this false alarm and this thought that feels real to them. And so you are basically challenging it. You're increasing the anxiety around it, but the consequence doesn't happen because the thought's a false alarm, right? And the consequence is either really, really, really not likely to happen, or it's not going, like in this case, it's not going to happen. I can't possibly get sick from this. But a lot of kids worry, like maybe I can get sick if I touch that. And the anxiety goes up, and then you gradually habituate. If you don't do the compulsion, you gradually habituate to it, and it goes down. And eventually the thought just becomes a thought. Your mind can kind of separate, like, oh, that's just an OCD thought. I don't have to do something about that. Versus this is a worry thought, like I touched the hoagie wrapper and I'm going to sit down and eat. Now I need to wash my hands because it came from outside of the house, right? And it helps your mind discriminate between what thoughts to pay attention to and what thoughts not to pay attention to. So doing a session in a dirty bathroom for a child who dirty bathrooms are triggering is a really good way to do that exposure piece and help them not do the compulsion in response to it.
It's very cool. I think about just in general, us being online now, and I know you probably may be using videos and pictures in general in your regular practice, but I don't do a lot of videos in my regular practice. But I would feel like now that I'm sharing screens in terms of even doing pictures and showing videos and being able to do the exposures that way too is pretty neat now that we're in a telehealth platform and can really, it's so much easier to watch it together.
Right. And a lot of kids can't do the live stuff yet. Like they can't do the in-person. So I'll even use videos in my office for kids. Sometimes just seeing a video of something makes them really anxious, even if they're not in it, right? Versus going and touching a doorknob, right? And so we might start with that anyway. So it's a good place to start with. Only the nice thing about this is that you can get sort of totally immersed in it. You can put yourself in it. Which is a great, I'll probably transfer this back into my office, when we go for kids who are not ready to do the in vivo live kind of exposure work. This is kind of a nice thing to put in first where you're still in the picture. So it's something I didn't think of doing until this point. We would normally just look at the videos, but we wouldn't necessarily put ourselves in the videos.
Right. Yeah.
So that's a silver lining of thinking of like other ways, like some things I'm learning now with the telehealth platform that could be transferred back into the office.
And I think that's what's been really cool about this process, that it is such a learning process for all of us. And as we see each client, we get a different idea of how it works because we've been doing it and it's kind of been in our head all along, but it's just coming out, right? How are we healing kids through literally a different lens, right? And it's been pretty cool to be able to just hear how everybody creatively is just accessing this new platform because we really don't have a choice and we're doing what we need to do.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that it's really amazing to think it's stretching my creativity. Right. And I think with exposure-based work, you already have to be creative, especially when you're doing it with younger kids, because you have to find some ways that are, not that are kind of fun and playful and things like that. Like you can't really just do a straight, with the older kids, you can do sort of a straight out exposure. We're going to go touch the doorknob and then we're going to sit with that feeling and not wash our hands. But with younger kids, you really have to be playful. And so, doing games where you're doing Simon Says and every so often Simon touches the doorknob, right? Or something like that. Or a lot of times I'll play games with kids where I'll use tape and we'll do tic-tac-toe like on my desk, and we might use cookies as the pieces, and then we'll eat the cookies after. So the cookies were on the desk, they weren't on a plate, right? They were in my office sitting on the desktop, and that's a good exposure for kids who are really anxious about, well, what if there's something on that cookie now? What if I get sick from that cookie? So ways to kind of take that playfulness that I use within the OCD exposures and transfer it over to the virtual setting is forcing me to be really creative and to think about other ways to do those pieces. But the other thing is that typically, in between sessions, kids are doing these practices with parents. And the nice thing is that now, especially with the younger ones, the parents are in the session with them at their home. And any intervention we're doing and any practices we're doing, the parent is orchestrating and I'm supporting. And I do that in my office as well, but it's very different when you're there in person and you're in your office versus when they're in their home and I'm on a screen. And so there's something about being in the office and being with me in person that automatically sort of makes the exposure a little bit easier, right? They don't have the history with me that they do with the parent. They're not expecting me to like save them like they do with the parent as far as like, this is really hard. This is hard for me to do. There's a whole bunch of pieces there. And so to help be able to support the parents in conducting the exercises and helping the child work through it has been really helpful as well.
Okay, Joelle, come back to your pretty playroom and out of your dirty bathroom.
Your dirty bathroom bottle. Should I stay on?
See, I'm feeling triggered. I think you should. So I
know. There you go. I know. See, if you stayed in that dirty bathroom with me for longer, you'd stop noticing it.
See, and I was feeling like a whole like different energy, and I'm like, I need Joelle's playroom. I need to see those toys, and I was like, just feeling it, and I'm like, no, I need a different energy, and I had to like switch gears with it. So It just shows how much I just like was totally, you're talking to me, but I'm focused on the dirty bathroom behind you.
Yeah, so. I mean, and that's the thing about OCD. It's like sort of like an exaggerated endologic stretch in a lot of ways. Right. So the things that bother kids with OCD bother us too, but not to the point, it's not exaggerated and there's not a logic stretch for us, right? So like if I'm sitting in that dirty bathroom, I'm not going to get sick, right? The one that we just did. But OCD has that logic stretch where the kids think, well, what if I get sick? What if something doesn't what happens? And because they feel it, they think it's true. And again, the exposure work helps kind of pull out that just because you feel it doesn't mean it's true, and lets it be just a thought. But based on what you just said too, I think I did want to mention that in general, OCD tends to be more triggered in times of stress. And I think it's really important too to spend some of the session really just doing some playful connecting, some work around whatever's going on with that in the household, what's hard in the household, helping parents figure out how to manage the stress both in the household and for themselves, because that's going to affect the stress in the household. Because that's a way in and of itself to help pull down some of the OCD symptoms. the more stressed you are, like the more you're looking at that bathroom while you're talking to me, the more you can't focus, you can't concentrate, right? And other things are like coming up.
Right.
And for you, that's not OCD. That's like, that would be just normal, right? That's what people do. And that's just like a typical response to something that looks icky. You know, for kids with OCD, it goes that step further, that maybe now they can get sick or something like that from
Right.
just looking at it. But also in general, I felt like it was a good representation of when your environment is off,
Yeah.
how immediately people become a little more stressed and distracted. And right now our environment is off.
Right.
So taking that time to connect with the kids and play with the kids and do some of that work online is just as important in my mind as doing the exposure-based work, and helping the parent figure out how to have those times where they're doing some child-centered play or sensory play or something really fun where they're just sharing enjoyment with the kids throughout the day off and on, I think is really important for the overall treatment as well.
Mm. Okay, Joelle, I think that's a perfect way to close of ending the importance, which has been in every one of my videos, of the connection and of the play and of those pieces. And I just think it's, yeah, this is such an important video for clinicians to know, for parents to hear about, and that because OCD, you know, that we do need a lot of training in it, and really understanding the process now when things are coming up more. So some kids that we weren't like really quite sure in terms of did they have OCD, we're seeing an increase of it now, and being able to know, you know, what are we looking out for, and what are the best ways really to treat the child as well as helping the whole family to navigate it.
Yeah, it's an interesting area, and it's an interesting area to learn about. And anytime I tend to do more of something, you know, typically what I found is it's a lot of times it's what's really important to you, right? Like if you really want to be a good person, the obsessive thoughts hook on to, like, you know, maybe you did something wrong. Maybe you lied to somebody. Maybe you touched somebody in the wrong way, whatever it would be. And they
Right.
hook onto that. And, you know, if it's important to you to stay healthy or have people stay healthy, that's what it hooks onto. So I feel like there's a lot of that piece. And right now there's a lot of importance on staying healthy and staying safe.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy to hook onto that piece. The one other caveat I do want to add is that, you know, I never do exposures around things like, well, touch that, maybe you'll get coronavirus, maybe you won't, kind of thing, because we don't know at this point. Like, we don't know, and people are passing it when they don't even have the symptoms. And so it doesn't make any sense to do that, because that's a real worry. That's something we have to pay attention to. So all the exposure-based stuff right now, I'm not doing it around the issue of coronavirus, other than looking at, are they hand washing excessively or asking for excessive reassurance or
Mhm.
things like that. And then I'm working on that end of it, but we're not doing any direct exposures, because at this point that doesn't make sense, because it is a risk. It's not an obsessive thought. It's actually something that we should pay attention to.
Right. Joelle, thank you so much. I always learn so much from you, and this was so helpful, and I think it's going to be so helpful to others. So thank you so much for taking the time, Joelle. It was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy.
Okay, be well, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.